you know, would go on unemployment. Most of the women, having a Southern background, knew how to do what's called canning and the preserving of fruits and vegetables. So that, and they would put this stuff up during the summer months so that when that unemployment check maybe ran out, the family would have something to eat. I say that less than 10% of the population that I grew up around in Atlantic City were considered professional by background. So that's my context. I leave for college in 1961. We always thought it was interesting that most of the people we knew from the high school who were like us, and we were still calling ourselves, or we were calling ourselves Negroes at that point in time. We had not become African American, nor had we become Black in terms of our orientation. We never had discussions with any upperclassmen. All we knew was most people who went off to college, and we had big classes at Atlantic City High School. I mean, we were graduating over 700 people per year. And the majority of those who wanted to go off to college all went south of the Delaware Memorial Bridge, literally. A few people would go to places like Cheney and Lincoln University outside of Philly, but everybody ended up at places like Howard and Hampton, and maybe Morehouse. And we never ever asked any of these upperclassmen, why they were picking those schools. And we get to be seniors, and we found out because most of us started applying to half of the schools in New Jersey, and then we picked 3 or 4 more of the historically Black schools. And the next thing you know, you get into the schools in the South, and most of us were not getting in those days into the schools in Jersey at all. But that sets a context, because something almost miraculous happened with me that I give God full credit for. I was probably very, very average, and when I look at my skills, and as I left from high school, I was just an average college-bound kind of a person. And first we go on campus, Dell State gave us all this little placement test. And what we did not realize, and no one told us, is that Dell State was going to use those placement tests to put people in adequate types of circumstances. In other words, if your test discovered that you needed some remedial work, that was going to be one group. 80% of the students they thought would be in average work. And then they were going to take the top 10%, which would be 30 students, and they were going to put them in the first ever honors program at Dell State. And, when Andrew Frazier gave me my class cards, and it said I was in the honors program, I said, Dean, take me out. I am not an honors student. But Dean Frazier said in his very polite voice something like, Negro, you better keep walking, man. This program is going to happen and you're going to be a part of it. But I say that as an introduction because I didn't perceive of myself as being that academically gifted to do honors work. But as it worked out, God knew the plan that he had in store for me. And I say this to this very day. If I had stayed and gotten into a college in New Jersey, I wanted to be, when I entered college, a middle school teacher. I got in that Black college in the environment of the 60s, and those professors demanded excellence from us. And you now see the man before you today, I've been a university professor now over 50 years at 3 different universities in the state. But God gets all the glory. But I always have to give that disclaimer. But to say that we as a people have always kept our hands in God's hands. Now, just for your information, I said my paradigm, my model in leaving for school was to learn how to create employment based upon the model that I had been exposed to in Atlantic City. That was my motivation. How do you create employment? Matter of fact, I had an idea in the 60s because some of us, we were bus boys in hotels. We could clean off the tables, but we could not of white people, but we could not serve people in the boardwalk hotels. And then at a certain point in time, one of the maitre d's who happened to be gay, I just say that because he found that he had more in common with the struggle of Black people than when other people would look at him in a discriminatory way. So that he used to love to talk to us during the summer, the guys who went to the schools in the South, about the civil rights activities we were involved in. And before we realized it, our last summer there is summer before our senior year in college, the maitre d' went to the owners and said, we got some busmen here who are really in college. They really are gentlemen, and we think they could, they would be a great, I can say this, they give great service. And I think the hotel management told him to go take a hike. Now he was the maitre d', but he vouched for us. And the next thing once the management approved it, the management said something like, look, they told us don't call the newspapers, that we don't want to publicize this. But anyway, we were among some of the first Negroes to be serving white people at the exclusive boardwalk hotels. I came up with this idea in that context. And the idea was, I said, man, if I had the money, I would build a hotel and we would enclose most of it. We would have an ice skating rink, and we would also bring in sand, tons of sand from the beach, so that I would have a year-round resort. I mentioned that idea from 1964 because somewhere in this country now, people just beginning to build those kind of resorts. So I share that to say, God was birthing in me these notions and ideas. All right. So that's my phase one of who I am. Then phase two would be as follows. During, I think, the 1970s and 80s, shortly after King is assassinated, the Congressional Black Caucus gets formed. And out of that, we start getting people like it was Parren Mitchell and others who began to put together at the congressional level these task force looking at the future of economic development in the Black community. I was honored to be selected to be one of the people, but there's about 30 of us we went into DC for about a week, and we were developing plans on paper as such for what the future of Black America would look like through thorough economic development. And I might add, in that entourage, I haven't thought about this for a while, so let me get this straight. I may forget his name. The first brother who had a seat on Wall Street, I believe his last name was Bell, and I apologize because I really haven't thought about this for a while. He was he lived in Jersey, and he was among the folks who were summoned into Washington, D.C. But out of that, eventually emerged what we called in New Jersey. The Congressional Black Caucus started a movement, and they produced a handbook, and it was called the Black Family Plan for Development and Survival in America. And there was a page in that book for every institution within our communities. One page for the Black family, one page for Black colleges, one page for Black economic development, one page in there for prisoners and inside of the prisons. We came back to Jersey with that, and we formed, and I'm curious now, so like everybody can say if you remember the name of this organization or if you were ever heard of it. But we formed something then called the New Jersey Minority Business Brain Trust. So the model that the Congressional Black Caucus put in front of us is that they wanted brain trust throughout the country, one in healthcare, one in economic development, a brain trust in housing, brain trust, in educational development and so forth. So the brain trust is formed. And let me think, some of the largest businesses in the state of New Jersey were part of that brain trust. I haven't really thought about this for a long time, so I'm not going to get all the names, but I can think about Malcolm, and I can't remember right now Malcolm's last name. Malcolm Dunn, D-U-N-N. I've got it, out of Plainfield, New Jersey. I believe at that point in time, Malcolm Dunn was the president of the largest Black-owned business in the state, which he was a maintenance firm. He had contracts with Newark Airport, et cetera. But that was the caliber of the kind of folks who were in the New Jersey Minority Business Brain Trust. My presence on that group was primarily because since they were mostly business owners who had to spend, the majority of their days running their businesses, they needed somebody who had, in a sense, there we go. Thank you, Andrew. That is Jeff. Yes. They needed somebody who had those kind of research skills and the time to do the things they could not do. So I became their consultant arm. One of their first objectives was to approach Governor Kane, I believe, and to ask the Kane administration for minority set-asides. By the time that got compromised by the system, it became minority and women set-asides. It started off being just minority set-asides. And that probably would represent I think my historical background. People were just using the kind of stuff that I would put together. Like I said, and then Seton Hall, we became the home to the Minority Business Brain Trust. I can remember one of the highlights of the many years we were in existence, and this is prior to the out of Trenton, the African American Chamber of Commerce emerging. The president of that might have been one of the members out of the Minority Business Brain Trust. But once upon a time, prior to the release of Nelson Mandela, there were African Americans who worked in the State Department, who were hosting in America for about a 2-week period. We had a group of South African Black businessmen who were they wanted to look at minority developed businesses in this country. And this had to almost occur almost under the cover, so to speak, of the State Department. But the State Department, for example, when they were going to bring that entourage into New Jersey, I then became the host for that. So that group was in New York City. I think that prior for 2 days, we brought them over here for dinner. We invited every Black-owned business in the state. And most of us were fascinated by the fact that what little we knew about South Africa, we did not know, for example, that there was a Black entrepreneurs, if you would, in South Africa. So I'm just going to share that as my introduction to who I am, what I've done, and my appreciation for the Black business piece. Now, the third phase of what I could talk about before I get to the PowerPoint, which I have, and if I've taken too much time, then everybody can tell me that's it. But this is what my historical research while I was a student had revealed to me, and this is what partly my motivation for really boosting Black economic development. Thank you, Andrew. I was very curious about that period of time, let's say, leading up to the American Civil War, and then the eventual writing of the Emancipation Proclamation, and then what began to happen to our people right after that period. And because this is not something that was ever written up as such in history books. And what I'm literally mean by that is, with all the freedom, what did we do with the freedom we had? So I'm going to mention two observations. And one would be through the writings of Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. As you know that name, he is the first African American to receive a PhD in history from Harvard. Dr. Du Bois wrote a study called The Philadelphia Negro. In that study, he fundamentally showed this. Many white millionaires had settled in and around the area of Philadelphia. And the Black business community was so well developed that indeed the highest class of service for any business that was coming out of Philadelphia were being delivered by the Negro business class. So he had stories in there as such, like this. If you were the richest white person and you were throwing a party, if people came to your party and discovered you had a white caterer, they would say things like, "Oh, you couldn't afford the brother for your event?" And I went like, my God, what happened to us in the meantime? But just understand that kind of pivotal development But these are not things that we were learning about, but indeed had existed. That at a certain point in time in our freedom, particularly in areas of major where areas of development, we had done quite well. And then obviously, you know about Booker T, just generally Booker T. Washington, and his movements toward forming Black businesses. We now know the story of Black Wall Street that he had renamed because so many millionaires, Negro millionaires, were being developed in that area. You know, that was indirectly related to the fact that they discovered oil. And as you know, people were making more and more money, meant a lot. Some of that money is spilling into the Negro community. So Booker T. Washington nicknamed Tulsa, Oklahoma, you know, Black Wall Street for us. So that is my first observation that, you know, we had done mighty, mighty powerful things in the area of business development. The second observation I'm going to make comes under the heading of what happened to all of that. Well, people like, let me think, the journalist, and her name may take me a minute to get her name, but one of the first female Negro journalists of national reputation.
Ida B. Wells?
Ida B. Wells, thank you very much. Ida B. Wells Barnett. She had gone away to do some lecturing for a while, and when she returned to her home community, you know, some of her main bros, if you were business owners. And she returned on an occasion to discover that these couple of brothers had been lynched. And then she saw the relationship between lynching and how the white community was impeding our progress. Is that, you know, they were targeting in many communities those who had stepped up to assume first-class citizenship. And she then went on a crusade using her writing to show how white supremacy was actually undermining Black economic development by targeting Negro business owners. So once again, I say those are my two pieces that I wanted to get across to everyone, because so often when I do some presentations at integrated audiences, you know, there was a lot of hostility toward, quote, our Black perspectives. And people would say, well, why don't you all just pull yourselves up by your own bootstraps? And you all know the famous quote from Dr. King, where he says, it's kind of cruel telling a bootless man to pull yourself up by your own boots. Then I would say, yeah, whenever we could buy the boots and we owned the boot store, you guys would come in there and probably demolish the whole thing. So we understand the relationship between Black economic development and white supremacy. So Andrew or whomever, if you can give me presenter rights, I will now pull up the presentation that I was asked to pull together for the purposes of the first expo for the Empower the Village organization. They wanted it to focus on Black entrepreneurship. So thank you. So let's see if I can do this right. So everybody just give me some signals as to what you see and what it looks like.
Yeah, just came to.
Mm-hmm.
Just waiting for you to start the PowerPoint.
Got it. That look right the way it should look? Got
Yes.
it. Yeah. All right. So you can see the title and the dating on it. So here is a reflection of mine that corresponds to what you just heard. And I'll just touch on the pieces that I didn't touch on before. Like I'm born during World War II. by the time I'm getting almost toward being a teenager, or almost, one of the stories I was hearing around Atlantic City, and I couldn't really make a lot out of it, except people were kind of excited about as they told the story, was that Madam C.J. Walker's daughter was a resident, lived on the same street and block as my aunt. But like I said, I did not comprehend until many years later, the historical significance of that. But I will also say 1 block from my aunt's apartment on Indiana Avenue was also an Apex beauty salon, which, as you know, many might understand that this is how many of our women became entrepreneurial in these hair care places. Madam C.J. Walker becomes allegedly, America's first female millionaire, and first, I would imagine, maybe one of the first African Americans. I'm in college. As a 17-year-old kid, I joined the band at Delaware State, 1961, and we go down to take part in the fishbowl. So don't smile, but that's how it rolls, in the Black community, in Black schools. The fishbowl was being played in Norfolk, Virginia. So when they were getting us ready for a parade, they had us assemble in a certain location. And then we were standing in front of this bank, and the bank was called the Maggie C. Walker Bank. So right away, I'm scratching my head like, a bank named after a woman. I said, that's kind of interesting. So, as soon as I get back home, we didn't have computers in those days. I did all I could do to look up Miss Maggie C. Walker. And indeed, I was startled, in a sense, to find out about her background and her entrepreneurship. But once again, I was just happy that I did not stay in Jersey, because these are things I never would have found out. That I mentioned earlier with the MLK's assassination in '68. By that fall, at the Congressional Black Caucus meetings, they set up a mandate going forward. They developed a master plan, and I used to go around lecturing from that master plan that was set up. In the early 1980s, my wife and I made our first trip to Africa, and the significance of that also staggered my imagination. Here we were in a country that was thousands of years old, and you could get in a van, let's say in a modern hotel, and travel for 2 hours in a certain direction. And brothers and sisters, you would be at that point in a rural area that was just like it was 1,000 years ago. No electricity, no roadways, no walkways, no concrete, no asphalt. And we would see life practiced in the 20th century, though just the way it was thousands of years ago. That was just an impression. But the other thing I saw that was staggering to my imagination, we saw street corner entrepreneurs everywhere in Africa. We saw women by the roadside selling fruits or little snacks for people. So once again, that whole sense of entrepreneurism really filled my wife and I, so much so that we came back, and within a number of years, we put together an African shop over in Jersey City. And we had enough space as more white businesses went out of space. The management found favor with us, and we were able to move into larger and larger spaces. And when we did that, we brought in as many brothers and sisters as we could who wanted to be vendors. So we were pretty pleased with the kind of things we were able to do through the 1990s. And then, as I mentioned, the New Jersey Minority Business Brain Trust was set up. They were based out of Seton Hall. So we were pretty well pleased with all of that. Whoops. All right, next. Let me see something. When I look at this, this is probably simply a reference, if I'm pronouncing this right, to Aaliyah Walker's 1924 visit to Atlantic City. This was just some documentation. I'm not sure if I click on this, if that takes us anywhere. Oh, indeed. That's brilliant how this technology works. But you can read that for yourselves.
Yeah, we're actually still on the slide page. I don't think it.
You can't see this. Okay, article. Okay. Let me come out. Let me see what happens when I do. Excuse me. Bear with me a minute. See what happens if we do. So. Maybe I should minimize the page and that would reveal once again the PowerPoint. Let's see what we got.
Yeah.
What do you see there?
Still the old PowerPoint. I think you may have, instead of shared the screen, you may have shared the PowerPoint. So you'd have to come out of share screen.
Okay.
And then go back in to
Gotcha. That. Resume. I see and follow. Let's see what happens here.
Yep. So
that looks good now.
That's the slide screen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. All right. On this particular one, I was pointing out that there was a period of time when, we were defined under the laws of the land as not being human beings. We were the property of others. That's called the chattel slavery period. So this may be something that many people know already, and that is that many slave masters and owners were able to completely get credit financially and legally for the inventions of their brothers and sisters that they had in under their control. So that I put together just some numbers here to keep it short and concise. I really love the data I found for that second paragraph, because once again, so often one of the criticisms that are hurled at folks like us when we're out in larger public settings is, why don't you all do like all the other immigrants and pull yourselves up? As we indicate, this particular, I think, fact speaks very strongly to that immigrant analogy, that indeed we even did more than many of those immigrant groups ever did. Anybody can stop at any point if you want to ask me any questions and comments.
Okay.
If you look at, I'm not too sure if this is exactly what you see. Do you see the on the right a slide that says,
yes, without Black inventors, you wouldn't have these?
Yes, exactly. So you can look at that for yourself. I think particularly young children, if I just take that one slide off sometimes when I'm going out to be at elementary schools and middle schools and high schools, I do that to motivate them to understand in today's world. For example, if we can get them into understanding apps and app development of apps, if we can talk to people before they are like sophomores in high schools, we are able to turn their attention toward electrical engineering as a future career. But beyond that, through the development of apps and the entrepreneurial route, many people can get paid very early on in life without even getting a lot of education under their belts. And I often remind young people that more young people use more apps than the average adult does, so that they have a natural inclination if they just simply anticipate an app that can fill a particular need, that they're in a much better position than many of us are to anticipate those kind of needs. So now we get into some specific profiles, and this is set up so that anyone can just read these off. One of the hidden pieces of history within this, some people notice, most people do not, is that when the American Revolution was underway, the British made overtures to the enslaved in this country to revolt against their masters and to join the British. And with the proviso, if you would, or with the claim the British made was, when the war is over, if we win, we're going to be setting you all free. So what this leads to, when the war is over and the British have lost, the British were going to turn their backs on all of those folks. But advocates began to point out to them how history will never forgive them for that. So the British began to assist many of those brothers and sisters to, if you would, migrate up to Canada, places like Canada, so that they could be saved, if you would. So in the 1960s, I'm in graduate school, and my wife and I are going to honeymoon in Montreal. I get on this plane, and on the plane is one of my fellow graduate students from the New School for Social Research. And so I asked him what was taking him into Canada. I said, we're going for a honeymoon. And he said, oh, I'm Canadian. And I said, man, I never knew that Black folks were in Canada. And as a matter of fact, he said, then you don't know your own history. And I said, you're damn right. Nobody teaches us the history we need to know. But indeed, I came back from that trip and educated myself on indeed how is it that brothers and sisters ended up in Britain. But that's a story that many of us, and you see it's tied into the work also of Paul Cuffey. James Fortune. So this also speaks to that period that I mentioned that Du Bois documents in his work on called the Philadelphia Negro. Leadersdorf. San Francisco's first hotel. Now, one of the on my to-do list is to find out what is the status of that particular facility, if it indeed is still around. I know in some communities throughout the country, there is an effort to take some of these earliest things like the hotels and to actually see that they are covered under historical preservation if they're no longer fully operational. So that's a very unique piece of our history. And a number of these hotels are still around. I think they've been rehabbed in recent years and so forth. So I think in the recent movie that was done, I think during COVID, I think for Netflix, that looks at Madam C.J. Walker's rise. They also talk about her interaction, with other women who had been, in the hair business and, making the chemicals and their little competitions and all of that. I'm going to mention something because I don't remember if I have a slide. I probably do, but I'll mention it in this context. As we know about Tuskegee, um, well, beyond Booker T, he forms Tuskegee Institute. And I might ask you all like a class, because maybe one of you can answer this. Um, if you were describing Tuskegee Institute to someone else in a few words, how would you describe it if you understand the original thrust behind what he had in mind as the president? How would any of you describe Tuskegee Institute to someone in its earliest formulation? What kind of words would you use to describe it? If you can, it's just something very unique I'm looking for. Very few people know what I'm pushing for. But can any of you describe Tuskegee?
Um, well, isn't it agricultural and mechanical?
Agricultural based, among other things. Yep.
Okay. And
what was Washington's philosophy, if you would, of education? It's nothing really grandiose here. It's really simple. You could probably get it by guessing if you understand the debate, between Washington and Du Bois. But
wasn't it was very Du Bois's theory was around the talented 10th and sort of letting them lead, whereas Booker T. Washington was more what are the practical skills that we can build to help us now, and
precisely.
Probably more inclusive than what
Yes.
Du Bois's vision was.
Right. So let me add to what you said was Washington knew that it would be great discrimination and that we should almost stay out of the way of white folks, just do our thing and don't ruffle their feathers. And in saying that, he got a lot of investment money, coming from white philanthropists. But also he thought the more self-sufficient we were, the better it would be. So he was emphasizing business development, running your businesses. So the thrust behind Tuskegee was not just as an academic place, it was about an orientation. It was called a college, let's say, eventually, but it was about training people in the trades, carpentry. They could build. He actually trained the students to build the president's house. So he says, when you graduate, when you tell them you built the president's house, that means I can build you a mansion if you like to have it. He had the students making clothing, cooking, but he was preparing them for businesses. And Du Bois's piece was just the opposite. And Du Bois would have been considered a little more radical. And he was saying, look, they don't want us to get a higher education. And I'm saying that for the few of us who can get a higher education, we ought to get it. He said, but I don't think more than 10% of us will ever get a college education. He said, so therefore, we have a moral responsibility for you to share your academic skills with the other 90% who will never get to college. So that's a kind of a very traditional debate that when you study this period of history and people want to say, well, who was right and who was wrong, and we'll say no, and I say in the context of time, maybe they both were correct. It's not, we don't need one strategy. We need as many strategies as we can develop to really move ahead. But Booker T, like I said, he got a lot of white philanthropists to put money into the school because they thought that was well, in essence, maybe a safer way that they felt more comfortable helping the Negro population. So here's another story I want to tell, and I'll apologize if I have another slide in here. I haven't looked at this material for a while, but I want to mention that. All right, who can answer this question? Name one of the major scientists that Booker T got to come to work and research at Tuskegee. Name the name of the number one major scientist who has made major contributions to our scientific history. Who was that person?
Carver?
It was George Washington Carver. Now, here's a piece of trivia that I use this with young people to establish their greatness. But We all know about the peanut. So who wants to tell us about the peanut and Carver? What can you say about the peanut? And why was Carver doing research on peanuts?
Well, he made a ridiculous amount of products with it.
Precisely. But his primary motivation was to help Negro farmers to avoid what was going to happen with white farmers. He said, when you only plant one kind of product or commodity year after year, you are actually depleting your soil. And what you need to do is you have to rotate your the kind of crops you want to work with. Because in time, another 10, 15-year period, you're going to wear out your soil. So he was brilliant in that regard. And he was attempting to come up with products that would make Negro farmers rather help them to have more unique products to bring to the marketplace. So as we all know, the one major trivia fact about Carver was, you could say, the peanut. He found out, well, in the labs, he came up with 100 different things that could be made from peanuts. Now, this is my bottom line, because I discovered recently that he actually knew how to fabricate from vegetable sources, I'll just say artificial leather. Mr. Ford of the Ford Motor Company literally offered Dr. Carver almost literally what would have been equivalent of $1 million to leave Tuskegee to come and exclusively put this artificial vegan-based leather into those motor vehicles at the turn of the century. I want you to just think about the implication of all of that. Carver turned it down because he thought he had a moral responsibility to empower Negroes. So rather than him advancing himself, he stays at Tuskegee for the advancement of all of our people. And I think that's a powerful message. And it's I might stop a presentation and ask young people, what would you have done under similar circumstances? Because it really helps us all to understand, like in my generation, we grew up hating our image. That when I say grew up, that is before we were like teenagers. We hated the word Africa. Obviously we were suffering from low self-esteem. I got to Delaware State in 1961 at orientation, and most of us are running around, wearing sneaks and jeans and t-shirts. And there were 4 guys at the orientation who said they were freshmen, but they're wearing business suits. So we really thought it was corny. We thought they were professors who were trying to hang with us. And we thought it was corny because they couldn't even come up with a better story. And we said, nah, you guys are professors. And they said, no, we are from Africa. And I am 16 and my friend is 18. And we said, no, you're not Africans. Africans are primitive people who have, their faces are painted with war signs, and you eat Christian missionaries. And they literally wanted to say, what the hell are you talking about? And we said, this is what we understand about Africans. And, that was our awakening to what racism does to all of us. It filled our environment with negativity. And I like to say that, once many of us begin to wake up, we could understand how systematically we were being oppressed, that even we hated our brothers and sisters from the other continent because we had been lied to. But that was 1961 that we all had that major revelation.
Can I interrupt you to ask a question?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay, because you said we could ask anything, right? But I just enjoy listening to you, so I didn't want to interrupt. Do you know, like, at what point in time that offer was made to George Washington Carver about from Ford to come there? Like,
I'd have to go back into all of my notes
made at that time?
I'd have to go back into all my notes because I'm not sure if I and I said I may even have a slide here. I haven't looked at this for a while. But no, I will go back and make sure that I can document the year that occurred and everything else in the year he turned it down.
Yeah.
Yep. But like I said, that's one of those deliberately lost facts, in I think in history, and lost for I could say a good reason, but not for our perspective.
Right.
But think about it. Now the whole world, in a sense, or the Western world, is moving toward vegan options and everything. From fur coats to the food products we consume. And here is the lady herself. I don't know how many of you are aware of, or if you saw the film that was produced, I think, with funding from Netflix. And I'm not going to remember the title that quickly. So if anybody else remembers the title, but the Madam C.J. Walker story was produced, I believe, during COVID. And I never watched so much television in my life, but during that whole thing. But I'm glad to see that organizations like Netflix and I think Prime, but they are putting a lot of money into the development of Black-oriented filming. There are lots of African filmmakers are getting their projects funded. So there's an awful lot of even African history pieces that have been done now. I would call that to your attention.
Mm-hmm.
Moving into Atlanta. When I say Atlanta, I was thinking about one of the I may forget the years, between the 70s, 80s, or 90s, when the Atlanta airport was being redeveloped by Mayor Maynard Ferguson, I believe his name was. And they developed, in the context of talking about affirmative action, they developed a very deliberate strategy for seeing to it that the majority of the contracts to build what would then now be seen as the new Atlanta airport would be shuffled to the Black community.
So now I got another question. Looking at this slide, is the Citizens Savings and Loan Association associated with the Citizens Bank that's around now?
That I'll make a note of that to check into it in terms of the roots of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But like I said, once I discovered the Maggie Walker Bank, it just turned me on. How can I say this? To understanding empowerment. That indeed we had done powerful things in the past, but I think the fact that we were not being taught about it at any point or exposed to it creates a deficit going into the future. So once again, I converted a lot of this information into short presentations for young people to let them know that the sky is the limit, no matter how they are performing now, no matter how they see their communities in the world. The more young people I can get elementary schools to bring up, I say elementary, not high school students, the more elementary schools that we can bring up here from the surrounding areas of Seton Hall, that's an open invitation that I have. We bring schools up for a 3-hour period. We'll take them on a tour. I have my students take them on a tour of the campus. Then we sit them in a classroom and we put them through a 1-hour workshop called the Dream Weaver. So we'll say Dr. King and Harriet Tubman, all had dreams. Harriet dreamed about getting her family up to freedom. King talks about going to the mountaintop. So we say, look, everybody has a right to dream. So we want the young people sitting there, and these are usually students up to the 5th grade. We want them to begin to form a dream on paper. Then we'll have them in small groups. They write out the dream. We ask them to indicate what kind of maybe obstacles and roadblocks might stop you? What would you do when you are being pushed to stop it? But I'm just letting you all know how I translate some of this information. So then what we might show, though, that group is that we might have Martin Luther King's granddaughter, who's just becoming a teenager. She's around 12 or 13 now. We might show her leading a march for the environment or something and speaking in Washington, and so forth. But this is how we translate, I think, all of this power from these presentations into something that the young people can relate to. And then I also want to make sure that all of the grown-up youngsters who apply, who are at Seton Hall, understand that my generation in the 60s, we wanted equal employment opportunity. I remind them that while you're looking to get a job yourselves, I said, your future is the brightest that it could ever be in America. That is to say, the potential for folks to become entrepreneurial is just exponential in terms of the growth and the opportunities out there at this point. And I said, and I think that the growth for entrepreneurial activity is unprecedented as it's emerging in the last 10 years. So that's the same message that I would translate and give to our current students.
Okay.
And here is, I could say, the man himself when it comes to publishing. You know, some of you might know him. Sure. Yeah, we come out of the 1860s and the Emancipation Proclamation, and then for the next 100 years, there is a growth in what could be called the Black publishing industry. There were eventually hundreds of Black newspapers, and then we could say Black magazines. And Henry John, his vision for that Jet magazine, a weekly publication, in the last 30 to 40 years, that's exactly beyond his time. That's exactly how the entire publishing, magazine publishing market has evolved. It's evolved from certain generic publications to more specialized publications. And we as a people I would say as benefactors of the Johnson legacy, we're strongly a part of that. Anybody who teaches Africana studies anywhere in this country, or even in Britain, where we have a large number of people of African descent also, is going to rely upon the fact that Mamie Till, had a reporter from Jet who came in and took those pictures of Emmett. So when we pull up those pictures to talk about the impact of those images, we also want to talk about at that point in time how our people became informed about not only their freedom, but the Black newspapers served a vital function. So there we go with that. And the little backstory about discrimination in the loan market. Okay, Reggie Lewis. Anybody want to tell us about Reggie Lewis? Yes, sir, Andrew.
Big fan. He actually was on Wall Street.
Yep.
He was a lawyer. His autobiography is called "Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun?" And
Yep.
Basically, his story was about, trying to buy a business for years upon years and almost getting it, but always saying that, he wasn't ready or he didn't do enough. And then finally his first business he bought was TLC Beatrice, which was the largest leveraged buyout ever at the time. Mm-hmm. So, he was top class Wall Street lawyer.
Oh, yeah.
And really did some great things and did a lot of great things that people don't even know about just because.
Precisely. As a matter of fact, let me just add a line when you mentioned TLC, which actually stood for tender loving care. That was a code for our people in the marketplace. He wanted Beatrice TLC. He wanted to have 7 common products that every household in America, not just Black households, every household needed to buy once a month. And that ranged from Planters peanuts to Kleenex. So that was his marketing model. If you were to invite me to your son or daughter's high school graduation party, and you were to tell me that they're going to major in business, I can tell you right now the gift I'm going to give them. It's going to be his book, Why Should White Boys Have All the Fun? And I will put a very heavy inscription in there about the sky is no longer the limit for our people. There is going to continue to be all kinds of marketplace discrimination, but the fact that we don't have to rely any longer upon perhaps brick and mortar gives us a lot of wiggle space. There is a museum, I believe I said Baltimore, and if not Pennsylvania, but his family, they now have a museum which is erected.
Baltimore.
Okay.
Baltimore, as they say. Yep. I actually met his wife. Came to speak to our business school, our Black and Hispanic students in business school at NYU while I was there. So we got a nice private seating. So we got to talk to her about the experience as well. And she runs a company, very capable.
Right. And if I remember and all my brain cells are functioning right, I'm going to say that Reggie got his bachelor's degree from a place like Virginia State or something like that, but he gets his law degree from Harvard.
I think that's right. That sounds
okay. That's an important thing, I think, me raising awareness, because so often there's kind of some stereotypes out there about what certain schools can do and what other schools people think can't do for you. So let me share a little statistic with all of you. Right now, among other things that I push, I'm trying to encourage as many students as possible to do something they probably never thought they would ever want to do, is because I was never trained, never studied formally Africana studies or Black studies. It's just something that emerged. It was my hobby. And as it works out for 30 or 40 years of my career, I was teaching sociology, psychology, and some economics. And then as Seton Hall made more of a major commitment, I began to put Africana studies into my fold, became chairman of the department for a while. But right now we have an undersupply of a number of things. We need more Black entrepreneurs. We need more nurses. And at the university level, I can guarantee anyone 100% employment if a person can pull down 3 degrees, with a specialty in Africana, the Africana component and Africana content, because there's an undersupply. And I know that many parents, if they never heard me say that, then the perception many parents are going to have is, I don't want my child to major in Africana studies or Black studies because I don't think there's a future in it. Well, I'm here to tell you, at that level of a terminal degree, it's 100% employment, et cetera, et cetera. But I just say that just to drive the point home. Here we go. In the last 20 years, my friends, when you look at African Americans getting PhDs, usually most of those PhDs, Doctor of Philosophy degrees, are coming from white institutions. If you look at the backgrounds of the students, where they got their bachelor's degrees from, 75% of those African Americans who are receiving doctoral degrees from predominantly white schools, 75% of them, their bachelor's degrees in today's world are coming from historically Black institutions. So that should overcome, the nonsense that many people, they have no idea about the quality of many of the historically Black schools. And we do understand many of the other historically Black schools are still struggling to survive. We do understand that reality.
Okay.
Yeah, now I can say something as simple but basic as concrete. Who owns and controls the concrete? Just a matter of your positioning. And class, that is the end of the lecture for today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any
Really
final questions and
informative.
comments from anybody?
Thank you. Really informative.
Well,
Really informative. So this is me. I have a question.
mhm.
The brain trust, is that still in existence? What's going on with that?
I'm going to give a disclaimer on my answer. As far as I know, formally, no. I have a feeling at a certain point in time over the last 20 years, as the African American Chamber began to gain its steam and, work out all its little wrinkles, that energy was folded into. Because, like I said, the president and founding president of the chamber for a number of years, came in later to the Brain Trust, was an active part of the Brain Trust. But that's my general conclusion that I came to.
Okay, good.
I have a question for you, and thank you so much. It's so much, but
Yeah, absolutely.
As you were going through the history and your thoughts, and you ended on, you would advise that there is a guaranteed job, a guaranteed career for someone who majors in Africana studies.
Yes.
Now, we are in a political climate that is doing away with what's new, diversity and inclusion. Why do you believe that moving forward, there will still be a space for Africana studies?
Yes, ma'am. Because when we fight, we win. If you want to roll over and play dead, I ain't with you. No. That's the simply way I'm going to put it with our people. If we didn't fight to get off those plantations, I say, where do you think we'd be right now? But yeah, officially, it's about 8 to 10 states who have followed that line of supremacy. And this is how I follow through when you ask that question too. I tell my white colleagues all the time, I said, you all may want to sit here and be quiet, and you think you're tired of the Black radicals spewing out this stuff. I said, but every day in the last 10 years in America, your supremacy is showing all over the world. I said, and there's no doubt about it. And if we're not careful, we let that orange man back, if I say, if any of you are Republicans, believe me, I married a young woman whose father was really old school. We were married, and you may know or may not know that from 1863 up until 1960, our people were solidly in the Republican Party. And it wasn't until John F. Kennedy came along in his 1960 campaign. But my father-in-law, my father-in-law told his wife and his little girl once upon a time, if anybody asks you, you are Republican, we are Republicans, and you are not allowed to change your party. So when his daughter starts to date this activist, but that's my little, but anyway, yeah, democracy is being challenged. And I remind people, this is all really a part of the motivation is all around race. And there's no other way to hide this stuff. We are resilient people because we fight and we win. We don't win every battle, but we are winners. We should have been gone a long time ago, but when we fight, we win. And so here we go. When you mentioned that the AP test in African American history is being banned in some states, I designed a hashtag that I'm sending out all over the country to it, and it goes this way. I haven't. It's called banned. What they want to ban, we call it. It's called banned. Everything they took out, we got it in this one seminar for you. And we are making this. You may not know this, but there's 140 churches in Florida which are now taking up. They're adding to their mission work and their Sunday school work. They're adding Black history to it now.
No, we don't hear those things. We don't get that news.
I'm delivering the good news to you tonight. And believe me, this sounds almost like 1863 again. That is, in our freedom, Black churches, for example, had to teach people, adults, to read and to write. We taught people about banking functions. The Black church did all of that. The Black churches were our first loan of first resort. So to some extent, we have the resources historically. You just got to know our history.
Okay, can I follow up with something you just said?
Mm-hmm.
In reference to the Black mindset being Republican and switching to the Democrat.
Yes, sir.
We also know that the Republicans of the past aren't the same as the Republicans of today.
Yes, sir.
So would that coincide around the same time that the Republican Party started switching their mindset? Was that when Black people started going Democratic? Did that time frame come about the same time?
Well, I can give you a specific date once again. Let me think this through for a minute. So, for example, in between the 1940s and the 1960s, you might say some of our enemies in the Congress were Democrats, the Southern Democrats, who would be there to block anything that was really dealing with progressive policy around the racial issue. I hope it's clear the way I'm saying that.
Yeah.
So if anything, that was keeping us over that line. So Kennedy comes along and he's talking about there's a lot of unresolved business around race, and he gets a massive shift. I might also add, because you all look so young, I'm not too sure if all of you all were around this, but I started, here we go. I'm a junior in high school, if I remember correctly. And we're having the primaries. And I heard something I'd never heard before. I'm a junior in high school. And what I was hearing was you got Richard Nixon, the former vice president, running against this Catholic young senator who was considered too young to do anything effective. And then all of a sudden, we started hearing this stuff about Catholic prejudice, saying that Kennedy was more likely to follow the Pope than the American Constitution. And I had never heard any kind of nonsense like that before. So in other words, I started back in the high school, I'm asking people about white prejudice. And nobody really had any answers, no discussion around it. But I had never seen, I said, I know prejudice. It's like white versus Negro. But I've never seen this, what I call white on white prejudice. I mean, that's how cruel and vicious America became. Kennedy wins by less than 100,000 votes. And I remember very clearly the very next day, the Republicans were saying he does not have a mandate to be president. So they tried to discredit his entire presidency. He goes into office saying things like, the federal government has literally nothing to do with civil rights. And as you may know, television was just emerging as a force and a presence. So they start sending these reporters out to these marches down south. People began to see on live television dogs biting people, water hoses knocking people down the street, horses trampling over marchers, live on television. Ultimately, within 2 years, Kennedy begins to change his tune publicly and say, look, these Negroes are citizens like anybody else. They've got the right to protest. And what we're doing in this country is not right. And my guys at Delaware State, we said, all right, this guy is talking a lot of smack, and we don't know how long he's going to live after this. We were juniors in our fall semester, 1963, when he was assassinated. We didn't know exactly why, but we had our theory that here's a white man, a so-called white man, a Catholic, standing up for Negro rights. But our theory was they killed him because of his stance on civil rights. But, you know, there may have been other kind of things there, the Cuba connection, some other kinds of stuff. But I just share that was our perception. Then I might add a year later, our last semester in college, as we start off, you know, even Malcolm X was assassinated. In March of my senior year in college, it was the bloody Sunday, the Edmonds Pettus Bridge March. That summer of '64, before my senior year, the Democratic Convention was held in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And I could say off the record, I was a member of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And I had a very special assignment. I should not divulge it too much because one of you, but the assignment was, I wasn't going to go to Mississippi because I was working a couple of jobs in that hotel and whatnot. But we had a contingent that went down to Mississippi to empower Mississippi residents to be a part of the voting process in Atlantic City because they had been excluded. There were no Negroes on the Mississippi delegation that went to Atlantic City. So the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was going to empower some local citizens to go and to demand that they be seated alongside all the white men who had been elected. So that's where Fannie Lou Hamer makes her famous speech. My special assignment was based upon my rapport and my ability to walk the streets with all the gang members in Atlantic City. My special assignment that has never surfaced publicly was, I said, look, I don't want to see any Klansmen hurt nobody. And I said, because I'm going to take it personally about, you know, we organized all the gangs in the city to see to it that if we saw any Klansmen rolling into town, that might be the last time anybody saw them roll anywhere. I say that to you, that's one of them hidden facts in history. One thing that many people don't know, on many of those marches, in many cases, in some cities, there were organized gang members who actually provided protection. That's an unwritten piece you'll never see in many history books. So I really respected the work years later of Jim Brown, the professional football player. He worked an awful lot in areas like California to bring the gangs to the table of peace, to get them to work together. So he was able to use his entrepreneurial skills in rather unique ways of forming nonprofit agencies to do some work. But that's kind of like my living history. That's why I say for my generation, we never turn back. We just keep going forward. And like I said, when we fight, we win.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I got a couple quick comments, if
Please
nobody
do.
has questions.
I don't have a question. I do have a comment though, Andrew, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So thank you so much, Dr. Forrest, for this important Black History moment. You took me back to high school and first and second year of college with a lot of the information that you shared. I find it very surreal, though, for the generations that are coming up now who will never even understand the importance of the Black history that not only myself, I grew up in the 70s, but not only, well, I was born in the 60s, but grew up in the 70s.
Right.
I do remember Dr. King being assassinated. So I remember being in kindergarten, in school,
Yeah.
and they letting everybody out of school. Parents had to come get kids from school. And I reference that because I don't think that the generations that are coming up now are going to understand the importance of those moments. And it's sad. It saddens me that my grandchildren will never understand the importance of being a Black American in America.
Yes, ma'am.
Because everything is being so downplayed. They're trying to literally erase our existence.
Yes.
So when I believe Juanita asked the question as to why do you feel that anyone going into school will come out and automatically get a job? The first thing that I thought of is because we need someone, we still need people to be able to bring to the forefront the importance of our Black American history.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
instead of allowing our culture to die, we need many someones to continue to carry the torch.
Sure.
I thank God for the Black male husband that I have, because my 3 grandchildren aging between 8, 12, and 15 will never not know what it's meant to be Black in America, because the slides and things like that that you've shown tonight, we're very familiar with them because it's information that we share all the time with our grandchildren.
Sure.
I just feel saddened that their children may not get an opportunity to know the reason why we, as you say, we fight the hard fight, and we will continue to fight.
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you for just that constant reminder of why we have to keep it in the forethoughts of our minds, because if we allow the political aspirations that are out here now to come into play, there won't be any American history. There won't be any female history. There won't be any LGBTQ ABC community. And I don't say that in a joking matter. I say it very realistically.
Yes,
that
ma'am.
there will be no reference to any of the importance of American history for us.
Certainly.
So thank you again for that.
Thank you, Joy. Let me add a sentence without getting too wordy. I'm going to give you, in my classes, ever since I've been teaching since 1969, I could say that in my first school, Rider University, the discussion of race never came up in my interview. So I'm being interviewed to be director of financial aid and to teach. And and then I get the job, and months later I show up and I'm walking around campus and I noticed something kind of strange. And most of you could probably guess what. So I called the president, who was brand new. I said, "Do any colored people work here?" And he said, "Pritchett, I just started, in August. Let me call you back." So he calls back and said, "You it?" I said, "Wait a minute. This never even came up." I said, "This could be a matter of my life and death, me walking around." And but I say that to give set of context. So I started developing ways of talking to white people and what they don't know. Now, it's an example. I might ask a class, or I said, like, what year did America officially become a country? And they said, "Well, that's too much history. We don't know." So I'm saying, all right, so we got that. I said, "You all got here in the 1600s." I said, "Think about it. You know this. You eat beans and hamburgers." They said, "Oh, July the 4th." Then you go 1776. And I said, "Yep." And people had the right to vote. Is that when they started voting as a nation? And they say, "Yes." And then I'll say, "Are you sure about that?" Then I'll say, "What year did women get the right to vote?" And they'll say, "Isn't it 1776? These are university students. Then I say, "Why don't you look it up? Let's look it up." And well, before we had computers, we'd have to make that the assignment. They would go to their encyclopedias. Today they can push a button. And when they see that It wasn't until 1919 that I say, let's talk about this. What's that all about? Why is it that white women, you know, did not have the right to vote until 1900, but their husbands, many of them, got the right to vote, to say maybe in 1776. I said, actually, we had colonial legislatures for another 100 years before that. And that, I said, does that mean that white women had nothing to do with? And that's damn right they didn't. I said, what's that all about? And then I can pull up a title of a book, and on a slide, and the book would be called, let me get it. It's called White Trash. Yes, sir.
Dr. Pritchett, I don't want to belabor the time, but I just want to ask you, because I was just reading something today and watching a video, and you just brought up something. You said your history was in sociology, and so was mine. And I worked in higher ed and federal aid too, as a associate director and stuff in financial aid myself. Right. And so what I was just watching today was the shift. They were discussing the shift of, there's racism here, but within our own society as Black individuals, there is a dramatic shift that is larger than racism, but classism. Like within ourselves, we are opting to choose a higher class and portray ourselves and leave off our Blackism.
Yes.
Do you find that? Are you seeing that as well?
It's not new, not new. No, but yes, it's, as a matter of fact, we had to point out to our students. We might say, what are our 10 homegrown enemies? Or not as people, but as the way we think. And one of those, it would be it's going to be classism. Look. Let me illustrate it this way. I got some cousins who, when we were little kids, they would come up from South Carolina and we would play together in Atlantic City. If my cousins didn't tell you they were Negroes, you would assume they were white. Okay? All right. 10, 15 years later, we all go to college. They go to Howard University. I'm at Delaware State. I'm in the band. We go to Howard to play a football game. I get their number from my uncle. I call him on the phone to say, I'm going to be there next weekend with the band. When the game is over, let's go out and get a beer together or something. And I said, because I know that at Howard, when the game is over, everybody gathers on the quad and you sing songs. I said, so let's look for each other. I ain't seen them Negroes yet. I would make a joke. No, but that speaks to that, as kids, we played together. When we're in college together, they never showed up. So for what it was worth, Howard University, by the way, went through a kind of a revolution at some point. There was a confrontation at Howard around the color issue. You could, for example, let's say if when they did the Miss Howard, what do you call it, the University Queen contest, if you had any color in your skin, everybody knew you're very unlikely up to a certain to ever be elected homecoming queen at Howard University.
They talked a lot about Hampton University.
Yes. Indeed, but classism, and we also call it colorism, is still an issue that we need to deal with in our community. Yep.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you for mentioning
time
that.
is running short. I'm sorry. I just want to say this because I know Andrew had some things to say, and my time is running short. But I actually come from a different perspective, and a lot of these topics from the computer world and the AI. And to me, I think of that as a much greater challenge in everything that you've just talked about. It gave me a great appreciation yet again for what we went through. And I mean, when you just to mention of Fannie Lou Hamer gets my blood boiling. It's like without a doubt. But I think about the changes that are coming.
Yes, sir.
And, back to Juanita's question, like I don't see the future. I mean, I look at it from a negative perspective. From my, I mean, things are going to drastically change in a very, very bad way. And from that perspective, I think how much your point of we fight and we win, will that still be the the case in the future, is
Well,
something that goes to my mind.
thank you. And I would imagine that there are going to be some people who are going to begin to do their little research about, you're right, just how quickly AI is going to transform the workplace, and how many jobs are going to be dislocated because of it, and what will be the implications for society and our patterns. Matter of fact, I'll just go out on the limb and say that when goods and commodities get to be scarce, it probably just increases social tension.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So, okay,
So
excellent.
we need a whole new generation, in a sense, be it social technology specialists. Like I said, this is not a fight for the weak-hearted and weak-kneed. We're going to, if anything, with AI emerging and the impact it's going to make, we're going to need some really smart people on the battlefield. We need all kinds of people.
Yeah.
We need people who could fight for the rights of the working classes, and yeah. Look, we have a new term out there, well, kind of new, called the working poor.
Mm-hmm.
That means these are people who work 40 hours a week, and their total wages for the year will still define them as being poor.
Yep.
But they're working hard every day. And we know what happened when COVID hit, and those folks couldn't, and that devastated, whole families right there. Yep.
Okay. So, no,
I want to thank you, Andrew, for
no, thank you. This was,
I mean, and I'm glad I'm just getting over. I had been ill I just had some things bothering me, but I'm just this is my first day back to work.
oh,
And then yesterday I came out because I was and we were in yesterday morning, we launched our first ever NAACP university chapter. It took us 15 years, but we had to get 25 young people to step up. I'm saying that was always the challenge, but just yesterday morning, that's what we did before we left from Montclair. So I just share that, but getting a chapter of a national organization at a integrated institution wasn't easy, but I'm glad that God has me back on my feet today.
okay, excellent. So no, this was not just hearing about Black history, but living it. So thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you all I want to thank you all for you all being in place, being in communication with each other, networking, because that's like the foundation for power that can emerge.
Definitely. And I'll just say that I think Don Viapre was one of your brain trust people back in the day. Or
can you repeat that, please?
Don Viapre was
okay.
Brain trust, or maybe became part of it at some point. But he's sort of been a mentor. And
okay, gotcha.
Actually, we talked about the brain trust and bring it back, and that's actually my initiatives are called brain trust initiatives.
Gotcha.
With him because
yes, sir.
Definitely was a big thing. So yeah, this has been great. Definitely, being able to share things like this. I think everybody learned something from today. I know I definitely did. And definitely applaud you for what you've done and what you're doing. And if we can support you, let us know as well.
Pardon me, I'm not going to take a lot. I'm just going to give you a couple of sentences, everybody. One of the other things that I do at the university that's not even reflected in the title of my slide, I'm also the director of the Martin Luther King Leadership Program. What is that? Every year I have 20 $7,000 scholarships to give to members of our entering class. So we might have sometimes 100 to 150 young people who will apply for something like that. It breaks my heart immediately, but I can't give it to every one of them. But I just like, the university started that program as a scholarship before I got here. They started that program in 1970. Even to this very day, members of the King family know about this award and the program because they think we're one of the earliest such programs in the country. So I say that for all of you, that in your movements and your work with young people, if any of them are interested, be it in staying in Jersey or interested specifically in Seton Hall per se, and would like to be a part of a social justice learning community while they're getting their degrees, that's one of the things I'm very proud of that we offer here at Seton Hall, the MLK Scholarship.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent.
I'm also working on a proposal for next year. I'd like my assistant director. I'm going to ask for a what's called a graduate assistantship. I'd like somebody who's ready to pursue their doctorate in educational leadership and policy, who would be applying to Seton Hall. And then I'd like us to offer them a graduate assistantship, which means we'll pay for all their courses, and then they will be assisting me as an MLK fellow. That's my next step. Okay.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Well, definitely, Mary, you have anything to share before we close out?
Thank you. Great information. Great information. I just believe me personally believe we're going backwards. I think we're working harder. At this point, I don't believe we should be working as hard as we are now as minority people and business owners, and I experience it every day. Instead of going forward, I see it's going backwards. I feel personally we're moving backwards, and we do need to get better with it, stronger with it, teach our younger children about it and what's coming, because I think the fight is going to be a little harder again for them.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
All right. Cool. All right. So next week we'll be in person, or sorry, next month we'll be in person. We'll get out the details, before the end of the month. Hopefully sooner than that. And look forward to it. Thanks for joining in tonight.
Next month.
Yeah.
March? Oh yeah, March.
Yeah, but we also have the Gateway, our parent organizations dinner coming up. So, hopefully, you guys are all getting emails and everything on that. And, so I don't know if, Erin's having trouble with her audio, but I forget the exact date. But again, I'll share that again when I send out the information from the meeting. But, I thank everybody for being here.
I have a question. What is the approximate date for your dinner?
It's the end of the month. That much I know. I forget the exact date.
February?
Yes, February.
Okay.
That's the Gateway dinner, right? That's the Gateway region.
Right, that's right. Which dinner are you talking about? We have
Yes.
Gateway, our parent organization. The entire Gateway organization is different from our BBA quarterly meeting.
Yes.
Right. So
no, all I was asking for, I thought, depending on when it was, I was going to ask the university, let's say, if I could, they would buy a few tickets, I'd bring some business students to come and hang out with everybody. It may be maybe it's too short. For the university, but if somebody would still send me the information, okay. I can, I'd be more than happy to help get some students there.
And actually, that would be, I'm going to send you some stuff as well. So
okay. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, there you go. Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right. Well, we got 1 minute. Anybody have anything to share in the last minute?
Oh, it is 1 minute. Great information. I know, right? Usually we have enough time to go over what we need to go. I think you had it. I thought you had another person. You didn't have Ms. Smith?
She's going to come another time.
Okay, she's going to come. She's going to come another day. Okay, that's fine as well. It was powerful, Dr. Foster. We needed what you shared with us today. I really believe that we did, as an organization, we need to hear that and remind us of all the
Sure.
wonderful people that fought for us to get to where we're at today. So thank you so much.
Yes, sir. My pleasure.
Okay. All right. So we will catch you guys next month. I'll be reaching out to you, Dr. Pritchett, on a few things, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Good job.
You.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay.